with that, I can open the field up now for questions pertaining to any of the three papers. And so people can raise their hands, or people can voice questions in the chat, in the question area, or in the main part of the chat. Either way, and we can open this up to some discussion for the rest of the session, taking us to 3 o'clock, or a little before, if need be. Okay. Let me just see if we have anyone raising hands. All right. If need be, we can sort of stimulate the conversation a bit amongst ourselves. I'm just looking to see whether there were any questions from the previous panel that might prove relevant here. You know, I mean, one thing I think that that Thrax brought up, which was also important in the previous panel, was this question of the role of universality and universal concepts. And in particular, the idea of universality as a necessary ground for human rights and the human rights concept in general. Yeah, okay. I'm gonna recognize Thrax in order to speak to whatever issue you wanted to bring.
Yeah, so I don't mean to interject, especially having just talked, but
No,
on that, one of the things that I come across frequently, because my academic contributions, I'm not a doctoral philosopher. I'm not a theologian. I can engage those subjects, but my background professionally is more in social sciences. And one of the areas that comes up all the bloody time is bad naming conventions, cumbersome terminological and lexical choices that we inherit from our disciplines, from our communities. So universality, this is one of those examples of a term that when I say the word, it leaves a bad taste for me. But I personally can't choose every hill to be the hill that I will die on. And so, for example, in one of my initial publications on theistic orientation of identity, I have about 30 pages that is just me challenging and overturning terms and naming conventions from prior scholars, from sociology, from psychology, from comparative religion and the sociology of religion, and so on. And what I found was that it was an incredibly unfair burden for me, wanting to talk about theistic orientation of identity, to have to go back and fix 120 years of bad naming conventions just in order to do that. And so I want to have, as sort of a plea to all of the scholars present, start fixing that in all of your writing. That's what footnotes are for. Challenge language. If somebody's established usage of something is not historically, etymologically, or even just rationally sound, or if they went with jargon because it was easily marketable and was going to get them published in a journal, challenge that, because some of these words are so foundational and so essential that it is hard and a burden to come up with new terms for no other reason than to respect what amounts to bunk scholarship that may have even been useful at the time, but isn't now. So as scholars, we have an obligation to challenge and overturn and reclaim those ideas and structures, and in some cases, as with universal, probably find new terms. Some of us need to die on that hill so that the rest of us can benefit from the cairn that we can build around them.
Well, yeah, and I mean, within the Ruist, or as it's known, the Confucian tradition, there's this concept of the importance of what's called the rectification of names. That a crucial part of the intellectual ecology of our ongoing practice is going to be constantly evaluating whether names are drifting either in their usage or in their reference from a relationship with reality, which is veridical and fruitful. And we could say veridical because fruitful for the overall social and intellectual organization. And I would just say, with regard to the question of universality, that universality is not a dirty word here. The question of universality, I think, just needs to be repositioned from a place where we presuppose it to a place where we recognize it as a goal. And so, universality, once we recognize that it's something that we're incrementally approaching and we have it as a goal that we get to a place, then we have the virtue that we're recognizing the actual kinds of negotiations and agreements that have to come about between different traditions, people with different kinds of orientations along different axes, the kinds of discrete agreements that need to be forged in order for those universals to be concrete and not just something abstract that's presupposed and, then through some kind of disciplinary means imposed on people, because then what we see is that people don't recognize their universality anyway. And so we haven't gotten to universality. We only get to universality by actually getting people to universally recognize some kind of universality. You can't just beat people over the head and say, it's universal, recognize it. No, people have to come to the table, willingly, and recognizing that they have a stake in acknowledging, let's say, the other person's right to exist, or their right to exist in the way in which they need to in order to flourish, and they need to recognize that they have a responsibility to that person to see the conditions realized in which they can flourish like that. And so that's the way in which it's not just then a language about rights in a vacuum without a notion of duties or responsibilities. The other person's right is concretely my recognition of my responsibility to recognize that this person has these needs, that the community is not whole unless they're being acknowledged and they're being given the conditions in which they can flourish. And so let me just see, before I bring you back into it, let me just see if there's someone else who wants to weigh in. Let me just make sure that there isn't anything in the chat either. Okay. All right. Yeah. So I'll bring you back in. But if anyone who wants to pose any questions to either Stephanos or to Justin regarding their papers, please feel free to break in at any point, because this often happens. You you have the questions at the end, and what's freshest in people's minds is the piece that was just given. That's the trade-off to not having the questions right away after each paper. But with that, Justin, yeah.
Two questions. One, well, so each of us in our own ways are sort of finding ways to acknowledge within existing discourses, whether they be religious, scientific, or legal, different positions of both identity formations and in relation to different ontological positings that have previously been either refused or denied. So two questions. One is how can we all, from our own different positions, come together to further this project imminently in the world? And second, for those who are, who may watch this later and not with us today, who are sort of stumbling upon this or into these discourses, what resources exist for people to learn more about this emerging framework?
Yeah, and so Thrax, you can just field that.
Yeah. One, both Justin and Stephanos, thank you both for your papers. I apologize I haven't responded. I'm actually having a sick day here, so this was a big ask of me to even have the focus for my topic, but I appreciated both of what you went into extensively. And I think that the question of, so basically, what do we do collectively moving forward to both continue the works that we as individual scholars and authors and teachers are proposing, but also how do we, the dialogue came up in the first panel, the discussion around some form of international polytheism, some idea of some form of organization. And there have been some, like that has happened at times in small microcosmic expressions that usually then burn in some degree of troll fire because of divergent identity proclamations or impulse control issues, I think is a fair way of saying that. So how can we, I apologize, there's a bird going off in the background that I just found out now has been probably screaming the whole time that I've been talking. He's joining the conversation.
No, actually, your mic must be very directional, because I haven't heard that at all.
Wonderful. How can we collaboratively and cooperatively continue even when we are all doing different things? And I think that the first step there is
different things,
in acknowledging,
like being a bird, for example.
Different things like being a bird. Yeah. But I think that a key thing there, though, is step one, acknowledge that we are all doing different things. So we had 3 brilliant papers today. I'm sorry, that sounds egotistical. We had 2 brilliant papers and then me rambling. And trying to stay upright in my chair. So how can we acknowledge the difference in what we are doing? Because you couldn't get 3 more distinct things, all within the framework of polytheism today and tomorrow. You couldn't find an array more distinct and divergent than those 3, and yet there is that inherence of commonality between, because there is a sense of hope and religion, pun here, but prayer, hope and prayer for tomorrow. But the idea also that the focuses that we are, each of us having, all of us having, not just those who spoke today, but all of us who are gathered here today, we recognize the necessity of these things for our world, not just for ourselves, not just because I like doing this stuff, because I do like doing this stuff. I do, I love it. I could do this stuff every day and never be on a conference about it. I would still be doing the same stuff without a Zoom call, but I would only have a bird listening to me. And he's not very good at cooperative and intellectually gainful human rights expansions, in that he wants to eat our eyes. So how can we learn to do what amounts to peer support of each other's work and each other's communities and each other's endeavors in a matter that not only is about what we're doing, but is about attracting, not to our religions. We're not trying to draw in parishioners or fill donation trays for the pulpit. We are trying to draw in attention to what amounts to essential human rights issues for everyone in the world. And I agree, for example, with Stephanos, we have a dearth of mystery recognition, and the need for that is so profound. I work a lot in trauma recovery ritual dynamics around mystery components within trauma recovery, and I could go into that just for hours and hours and hours on its own.
Yeah, I just want to since
I'll shut up. Yeah.
No, it ain't like that. I want to recognize Stephanos and then Patamasu.
Thank you. I want to first of all say thank you to Justin and Theanos for your papers and your presentations, because really you're both doing incredible work. And like Theanos said, we are all very different, entirely different approaches and topics, but all equally very important in their own right. About the idea of common terminology, common ground to work on for the future as polytheists and as traditions in general, theistic traditions, I'm going to take a page from my experience with Christian ecumenical methodologies, because my scholarly background is Orthodox Christian theology. A lot of things don't apply, obviously, because their issues with interfaith and with ecumenism is very different from what we understand as polytheists and how we respond to difference in opinion, difference in terminology and understanding. But like we are doing right here and now, I think the best way for this, and it's thanks to plurality and polycentricity, we can simultaneously accept two or more true statements and true definitions of words. The way I understand, for example, universality in my tradition, in my practice, whether personal or group-wise, might be one definition, but I have the capacity to put that aside in a big group like this with many different people and say, okay, what definition are we agreeing on? Because I may have my own and you may disagree, and you may have very valid reasons to disagree. My definition might be completely wrong. I'm not going to reject necessarily my own definitions and my own approach, but in the context of common work and common practice and common ground, we can solve those and say, okay, for now, I'm going to go with our shared definitions and our shared terms for furthering our goals and our common future. And then in my own space, in my own places, I can continue with my own definitions, my own terms, and my own approach. And I think that's evident even in the most simple of ways. Ritualistically, you can have people from all kinds of traditions do ritual together, because we can all say, okay, in this instance, in this case, I am following the leading group's rules and regulations and, purity guidelines. but that doesn't negate your own personal practice or your own personal group. And that is the main difference from monotheistic and absolutist religions, who the mere idea of selving their own beliefs and their own practices automatically negates them. Ours can coexist and superimpose on one another. So I think that's, by remembering that, we can sort of solve the problem of what are how can we have multiple people agree on the same thing. The problem is getting them to actually agree, because people can theoretically accept that idea, but struggle to put it into practice. And I know even from myself, sometimes certain definitions or certain uses of words or concepts really drive me crazy. But it's, I think, like Edward said earlier, a sign of maturity in our traditions and in their growth and in their existence is that we can have these discussions and we can have these attempts, at the very least, to move forward, if not necessarily together in a homogeneous way, in a very pluralistic and supportive manner.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the things that strikes me as significant about the lived experience of polytheists is the ability within polytheisms to be respectfully and worshipfully on the periphery of someone else's practice. And I think that this is something that is easily underestimated, because I think that you know, it's not sexy somehow, you know. And I was thinking about this in connection with the way in which we'll talk about people's recognition of other people's gods. And, you know, it's sexy when they're doing a lot of interpretive work, so to speak, and you know, creating an elaborate syncretism or some interpretatio type hermeneutic, you know. But what we tend to value less, because it's less interesting, it's less sexy, is when they just recognize that the other people have their gods and it's of no concern to them, you know. And so I think when we take religion as an analytic object, as something to be explained, we go for the relationship where people are doing a lot of interpretive work. But what we miss in that regard then is the experience where people are just standing at the periphery, respectfully acknowledging that other people have their gods and tacitly recognizing their existence, their reality, but doing so precisely by their inactivity, by not making themselves and their interpretation the center, but being respectfully on the periphery. And I think that there's something in that which can be scaled up to think about how we make something a theoretical object in general, in a way which is more ethical and more sustainable as a relationship between subject and object than the kind of typical constructions of the academic gaze upon an object of analysis. And so let me recognize Ptolemaeus and then Stephanos.
I just wanted to say, Justin, also, and Theanos, how groundbreaking and thought-provoking both your presentations were, and wow, just amazing. So I did want to acknowledge you. But my question was for Stephanos. Stephanos, you talked about innovation And you also spoke about your own mystical experience or your own connection with Hecate in order to bring through things you feel are relevant to the expansion of a mystery tradition in your work. Something that is a huge point of contention in the circles that I have dialogues in, which is I work with a lot of Reconstructionists who are very hardcore. And there seems to be a movement towards denying anything that isn't strictly from the historical record. And what you've talked about is not denying things that are in history, that's very much a part of it, but that we can innovate. And so what is your response to the diehard polytheists of the Hellenic Reconstructionist movement, as well as other Reconstructionists? What would your response be to their view that only what we can substantiate in source texts from history should be incorporated into our praxis, versus people who do believe that the gods are bringing through new interpretations and new additions to our practice? What would you say to that?
Honestly, that my work is not for them, or that I'm not talking about them, or they have their own space, I have mine. The thing, it's one of the reasons why I'm not very actively and primarily identifying as a Hellenic polytheist, even though I am Greek and worship Hellenic gods. Exactly because the main face and a lot of, perhaps the majority, at least according to my own experience as well, of the Hellenic polytheist community is as you described. My point is, Hellenic polytheism, like any polytheism, is polycentric and plural. It's not limited to anything. Just like in the ancient times, they had, even within the same regions that people recognized as Hellenic and as sharing language and religion and gods, they still had differences of opinion and even considering things barbaric or horrible, or we are never doing this in our city-state. Because, for example, the way Artemis or Thea in Sparta was worshipped, with flagellations of young boys in puberty, or the way even the Hellenic and Hellenized cults of gods in Asia Minor and Anatolia, especially great goddesses like the Ephesian Artemis and Cybele, had eunuchs as priests or temple assistants, something that would be very peculiar and very weird to mainland Greeks. The thing is, they still recognize all those that, okay, this is still part of our shared region or shared religious identity. Those are still Greeks over there. Those are still Greeks down in Sparta. But that's the difference with modern co-religionists, that they forget that even in ancient times, when people disagreed heavily and could never accept certain practices or certain beliefs in their own home, essentially, they still could differentiate that from rejecting the other party outright. They were still like, okay, you're still Greek, but we're not going to share into your practice. That's a big no-no for us. The thing is, I think these Reconstructionists are wrong, to be completely honest. I think they're wrong, and I think restricting a religion, especially a reviving religion that doesn't have continuity, that doesn't have the capacity for survival through other channels, and depends on our work, and not just, okay, we have the traditions and we have the cultural strata to maintain it, limiting it to Reconstructionism alone, and in fact even very purist, very strict Reconstructionism, is for me, a recipe for disaster and dooming the religion to die out. If they which they can't, obviously, but if they could maintain that aspect and enforce it, Hellenic polytheism would just die in a generation or two at most. Because a religion cannot remain stagnant. It cannot remain monolithic. Even Christianity changed over the centuries because it had to. It cannot, nothing can survive if we don't change and address new matters and new needs. For example, my mystery project, I'm not going to tell people to have grand processions from Athens to Eleusis in the middle of the night bearing torches. We don't have that. I wish we could, but we don't have that, the means for that. We don't have the people, we don't have the acceptance, we don't have the safety. That doesn't exist. Most practitioners, most worshippers nowadays are either solitary or in very different groups. So our religious practices today have to reflect those needs, and they have to respond to those needs. So, and especially, we have so many people interested in mystery, not just interested, but so many people, as I have discussed with others before, the reason why modern polytheism is so focused on devotional aspects, something that wasn't it existed, but it wasn't primary in ancient Hellenic polytheism, is because we lack priests and mystery cults. We don't have the people who would shoulder the burden and the work of doing the work to establish strong connections and deep connections. So all practitioners have to share that. And part of my work is to ensure that slowly we can unburden the majority of worshippers from that need and that duty, because a lot of people aren't made to be priests or mystics or any other kind of specialist. And the thing is, if we continue to deny anything other than what fragmentary information we have, we're not going to have religion. We're going to have a very bad theatrical play, because I have been to such rituals and they are empty completely. It's just a meaningless recital of words without any connection to what the words mean and to whom they are about, to whom they speak. And for me, a religion is a living, active relationship between humans and gods. And to reduce any of these two parts to passivity is to just ruin the religion itself. So I'm just going to tell them, no, thank you. Look elsewhere. I'm not the work for you.
Okay, I'm going to now go to Stephanos, who has been waiting quite patiently with our question.
Thank you. So this is just going back to the comment that you made, Edward, about the sort of relative unsexiness of just kind of standing by and going, I support what you're doing. Let me give you a story of how unsexy it is. There was a ritual that we used to do in one of the groups that I founded that we called the Communalia ritual. And it was a ritual that was exactly that. It was to say, we recognize that what another group is doing is important, and we support it, and we want to be allied with it. And so we would enter into a formal alliance relationship with them that, you know, basically said, if you have trouble, call upon us. We will defend you. We will defend, you know, your right to do what you're doing and to exist and all of that good kind of stuff. And we did it with a couple of different groups. I originally was hoping we could do it in a more wide interfaith context, but strangely enough, all of the monotheist and large religions that I proposed to do it with never responded. because they don't have to. What do they care, right? What do they have to gain by recognizing us? And so we did it with several groups. Unfortunately, some of those groups have imploded in various ways, or have broken their vows, so to speak, and have more or less ignored us. And, you know, we did that ritual and then never heard from them again, and things like this. So, I mean, I had hoped, because it is a ritual, it's not just, hey, we like the cut of your jib, go get them. You know, it's a ritual that we're formally swearing in front of deities of our respective traditions in sacred space with an audience. You know, I had hoped that, you know, that kind of means we're taking this seriously. But given what we've talked about today, and what we was it Indic Explorer? Is that the correct name? Yes. This morning was kind of suggesting about, you know, building this framework for international polytheism, and various other speakers have as well. Maybe something like that is a potential thing that could be used, because, I mean, here's the thing: we can form an organization and we can do stuff, but as polytheists, one of the great advantages we have is access to the continuous existence of our deities, and they ought to be part of the considerations. And so maybe that's something to build upon with all of this, because, you know, I mean, I've got it on an individual basis with a number of people here, though we haven't done the ritual. But, you know, I haven't heard or seen anything at all at this conference so far that makes me say anything other than everyone who has presented and spoke is my co-religionist. So why don't we put a ring on it, so to speak? Anyway, that's just kind of my.
Yeah, I mean, I love that for so many reasons. I mean, I think because for one thing, you know, it does, as you say, it expresses a form of community that we as polytheists can uniquely experience, because we are in a unique position to be able to have this kind of peripheral recognition of other people's gods on their own terms, rather than within a monocentric univocal structure where we're determining what their gods are exactly for us and fitting them in this into this broader worldview of our own in some kind of instrumentalized fashion. Instead, we can have this kind of genuine community where there is real difference and yet there's actual togetherness, because in a sense, you can't have actual togetherness without actual difference, because otherwise the other isn't present qua other. They're present as some kind of extension of myself, my kind of operationalized, you know, larger body. You know, it's an appropriation of them and an instrumentalization of them in the very act of constituting a kind of pseudo community, whereas through the kind of the kind of form that you were speaking of, we actually form a community of others who are really present as others, and also just in a more trivial sense, you know, I think it's a really good example of a much more positive appropriation of Roman ideas than what we usually hear when people talk about taking Roman models, and they're talking about celebrating some kind of imperial structure, which is not generally speaking a project that very many people are going to sign up for, or did in antiquity necessarily, without some rather stern some rather stern inducements, let's say.
I may worship the divine emperors, but I don't want to emulate them.
Exactly. Okay, let me let's see. We only have like 4 minutes to go. I'm gonna go to Thrax quickly. And at one point, I saw that Justin had his hand up. Justin, if you wanted to make your point, or was it something that
No, I just wanted to hear more about what Stephanos means by working with mysteries, the mystery.
Yeah, well, I think it would be great actually to have Stephanos speak on that, and that'll be the final comment of the panel, because I think it is useful to bring out a little more the sense that mystery has here.
Sorry, Justin, can you repeat exactly what you asked, because I missed part of it?
Just generally speaking, hear more about what you mean by working with mystery and different contexts.
Yeah, mainly the first that comes to mind, the main part is experiencing what I call the reality and truth of the gods, not just in the sense of I'm doing this ritual and I'm presenting these offerings and I'm saying these prayers, which can have very profound results and very powerful experiences, but in ways that are through specific methods that are intended to have stronger, I could say, effects and a stronger, more, a deeper view of a particular aspect of a deity, like in the Eleusinian mysteries, we suppose, because obviously we know nothing about any of the mystery cults in detail. Even if we go by the rumors that the culmination of the ritual was the silent viewing of a grain of wheat or grain of barley or whatever it was specifically, and that profound experience of the goddess after going through the entire mystery process, the preparations, the purity, the purifications, the rituals, and eventually culminating in what seemed a very simple and very, at others' eyes, meaningless experience. In truth, you get to see and view and experience an aspect of your deity that is unfiltered and without the masks of the main religious practice, which make everything more formal and more contained for human consumption, essentially. Mysteries can provoke visions, they can provoke life-altering experiences. A lot of devotional practices nowadays adds onto the domain of mysteries, and they effectively become mystery practices without the actual structure of it all, which is why they lack repeatability and they lack propagation, and why they're not traditions, but they are only occasional experiences. And so many people go after that, the high of that profound experience. When I say working with the mysteries and the mysteries, I mean essentially taking that not focusing on the high of the experience, but on the goal of the experience to, well, we could say in a more theological sense, henosis or theosis, to a communion with the divine beyond the level of common practice, and something that can show us a bit of the truths that we cannot grasp entirely as corporeal human beings, something profound, ineffable, and life-changing, because honestly, the handful of experiences I've had to that level have brought me here now and have changed my life completely and my career and everything in general. Even any acceptance of my own self and any issues I might have, they have shaped everything. And working with the mysteries essentially means learning and giving people the means to attain that as successfully as possible, because it's no guarantee, and because the gods are the other side of the equation, they have to respond to that. But essentially, that's it. Giving people a structure that can produce these results.
All right, and with that, I think that's the best possible note on which to close this panel. A very successful, very satisfying panel for me.